Hey, surprise stream for you guys today. So I was just upstairs making supper because, I'm not one of those patriarchy guys. I actually cook and, I do quite a bit around the house. So I was making supper and decided, oh, here's this thing on YouTube I'm going to watch. And it was John MacArthur having a conversation on Babylon B. And I thought that's interesting, given that, Babylon B just did like their big push for him with that video about like the woke parents coming to a Christian university kind of thing. So I just thought that was interesting. And so I was just like, oh, I'm going to be cooking. Might as well watch this thing. Maybe I'll talk about it for the show. And, I'm watching it and nothing is really jumping out to me until the very end. Like after they even did like some of the plugs, if you watch all these podcasts, they do the podcast, then they give the plugs right at the end. And it's basically like a formality of just like, it's over now. Well, John MacArthur, he had a few more things that he wanted to talk about. Okay. So we are going to watch this thing together and I think it'll be pretty interesting. Let's head over here and let's listen to J-Mac and what he has to say about a topic that is near and dear to my heart and a lot of people here on the channel. You guys have dealt with this, so let's hear. There we go.
And I would just make one further comment. There's a big trend in what's called deconstruction, Christian deconstruction, the hashtag exvangelical. The reason so many people are defecting from the church is because they were never converted in the first place. Yeah. You have the shallow, and there's not enough gospel in some churches to reject it. So people think they're Christians, but it doesn't survive. And it's like the parables of the soil. They don't survive. Whatever comes along chokes off the seed. So I think we're going to see a lot of continual defections and deconstruction. Not only because they're not true believers to start with, but secondly because it's now cool to do that. Now you're part of the new victim group. Mm-hmm. Okay. I can think back in years past that when somebody that I knew of, say as in my college days or younger years, was a Christian and claimed to be a Christian and they defected, it was kind of a quiet thing. They went away. There was shame and embarrassment. It was sort of like being a homosexual, say in 1945. No one knew that. You wouldn't let anybody know that. You wouldn't have a parade, that's for sure.
Okay.
So they didn't parade their apostasy. But that's a new category of victim in which you can garner popularity. And you can make a whole lot of new friends if you don't mind limiting your friends to the internet. Mm-hmm. So I think this is going to continue, which obviously calls on the true church to be faithful and to be strong and preach the true gospel so we don't produce half converts who will eventually deconstruct and fall away.
Amen. We will pray that that trend reverses or dies on the vine. We will pray that the gospel flourishes.
Okay. So, yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts. Oh, man. I don't know what it is this week. All of a sudden, just out of nowhere, John MacArthur stuff all over the place. But, I've already lost about 15 subs from yesterday. So I thought, hey, you know what? Why don't we tick some more people off and talk some more about John MacArthur? I don't know if it was Ruslan or John MacArthur, but people weren't happy about the stream yesterday, apparently. But that's all right. That's all right, because I'm saying the same things we've been talking about for a long time, and we've been talking about deconstruction on the channel for the whole time. Like we've been dealing with this, and it's interesting to hear some of the things, because a lot of times with John MacArthur, like you get little tidbits during his sermon, and because he is a textual guy, and I will give him all the credit in the world for his style of expository preaching. Now, some of it has waned over the years, but I mean, like his dedication to the text, I appreciate that. And I've learned quite a bit from him when it comes to that, of sticking to the text. But every once in a while, he'll give you his honest thoughts about something in like some little throwaway comment. And here, again, out of the blue. Like, this was at the very end of this interview. You could go and find it. Mostly he's just talking about the pandemic and lockdowns and, all the stuff with the Essential Church documentary. He's just basically going into that. And there's some interesting stuff there, but it's a lot. So I just decided I was going to stick away from it. And I was about to be like, okay, I guess it's over. And then just a second, I just want to say, and then just goes into this tirade about deconstruction. No one asked him for it. This was his thoughts, and I thought it'd be interesting. Obviously, I have a lot of disagreements, but we're gonna watch it back, and we're gonna be stopping and talking about a few things because there's a lot that he packs in here. Okay.
And I would just make one further comment. There's a big trend in what's called deconstruction, Christian deconstruction, the hashtag ex-evangelical. The reason so many people are defecting from the church is because they were never converted in the first place. Yeah.
All right. Now, I know it doesn't seem that way sometimes on the channel, but me and John MacArthur are from the same theological camp as far as like your ideas about soteriology. I am a Calvinist. So there is a certain part of me that actually agrees with that. Someone who is an apostate, it isn't like you lose your salvation, like that you were saved and then you apostatized, so you lost your salvation. I think a clear reading of Scripture is that, that is ultimately true. That someone who walks away from the faith and they are not saved, they are not part of the elect is another way to put it, but they're just acting as they are not a Christian. Like, they weren't saved to begin with. But there's a couple things there. One, it is so unpastoral to just be like, all right, well, if you're a deconstructionist, you were never saved to begin with. It's like, that's a conversation that needs to happen. Like these guys who just make these blanket statements about people's like eternal state, you don't know. You don't know that person who is deconstructed. You don't know what they've been through, first off, but also you don't know what they're thinking. And you don't know if they could come back. So to just like write them off and be like, well, you were never really part of us. I think it's belittling to that person. Like I've seen this time and time again with celebrity people like Rhett and Link. I've seen people who have been like, well, Rhett really never was a Christian to begin with. And I don't know why we got to pick on those guys so much, but like, I understand like they're public people. But like people just going in at it, like, you don't know. Maybe someday Rhett, gets it and he understands and he comes back and he believes the gospel. You don't know. So don't just be like, oh, well, they were never saved to begin with. There's a perspective of the ultimate truth of God's truth, that he is the one who does the saving. And so that's his reality, but we don't see that reality. So we can only deal with what we see. And I think it's so unloving just to be like, well, they were obviously never saved, when you're like, wait, what do they still believe? Like these guys always want to be like, all right, well, if they even use the term deconstructionist, they fit into ex-evangelical, which if you do any research for people who have been a part of this channel, most likely you've been in these kinds of communities. Maybe you are. I certainly am. And there's a big difference between ex-evangelical and someone who has said that they have deconstructed. Deconversion, deconstruction, these are all different things. And I know there's all kinds of debates about what exactly that means and why use that term when you could use this term. I prefer this term, whatever. That person is using that term, so deal with that person. And these blanket statements of, well, they were just never saved. I mean, that might be true. It might be true, but you need to have conversations with those people. You think that person is going to be like, oh, thanks. Like, oh, okay. Like that's just like, all right, so you're calling me a liar? That's what they're going to think, right? Like that's not pastoral in my opinion, but let's keep on listening to what he has to say.
You have the shallow, and there's not enough gospel in some churches to reject it. So people think they're Christians, but it doesn't survive. And it's like the parables of the soil. They don't survive. Whatever comes along chokes off the seed. So,
all right, obviously that's true to Scripture. That happens. There are different soils, right? Like it's the same seed, so it's the word, It's the gospel, essentially, and whether it's going to be received into good ground or stony ground or thorny ground. There's all these different grounds. But what he's referring to, he's calling basically deconstructionists the ground that has thorns around it, that it just like chokes the life out of that seed. And so that seed never bears fruit. So in other words, get saved. The problem with this, I would say, is why. And also, like, if you just talk to the deconstructionists, if you actually have a discussion with some of these people, you will find out that they actually have deconstructed for certain reasons. Like something happened in their life, usually, some kind of hypocrisy. I would wager a lot of money if I had it. I don't. But like if I did, I would wager a lot of money that the number one reason why people say that they deconstructed isn't because of like the actual theological statements of the gospel or of Jesus in his life. It's not that. The number one thing that they would say is hypocrisy, that they saw something. They saw Christians not acting like Christians. They were hurt by Christians. They were dealing with things. And so like, I think it's a little calloused to just be like, oh, well, it's like that. When you're like, well, maybe Christians are the thorns, like maybe like the life gets choked out. The faith gets choked out because it was Christians in the church that did that. Like, again, just like throwing these statements out there into the internet about something as like really personal and really like you just need to get deep into these conversations before you just throwing it out and say all of deconstructionists are like this, they're all like the parable of that, and then just like whose fault is it that like if the number one reason for deconstructionists deconstructing is hypocrisy, then whose fault is it that they deconstructed? Like he wants to say that, oh, it's the gospel. They don't have enough of the gospel. In other words, I think what he's trying to say is that it's teaching, like that they just haven't been discipled well enough. I've heard that a ton. Like as in like they haven't been given the information, not really that someone has walked with them in their spiritual life, but that they weren't given the crucial information so that when they were tested by, I don't know, going to college for young people or, a crisis of faith, something happens in their life. They don't know what to do with it because they haven't been given the information because they only had, Bill Johnson for a pastor or that celebrity pastor or that weak pastor who didn't give them, good, solid expository preaching every Sunday. Like I've heard that so often. It's just like, actually the number one reason is hypocrisy. If you talk to anybody and, so maybe, I don't know. I think we can handle these things a little bit differently than just being like, well, it's all this.
I think we're going to see a lot of continual defections and deconstruction.
I agree.
Not only because they're not true believers to start with, but secondly, because it's now cool to do that. Now you're part of the new victim group.
Whoa. Okay. It isn't. What's cool about deconstructing? All right. Like, again, I'll just use like the famous example of Rhett from Rhett and Link. Okay. What's cool? If you hear him talk, you can hear, at least at the beginning. I don't know how he is now. I haven't checked out any of his stuff lately. But at the beginning, when he was starting to talk about these things, you could hear the sorrow in his voice and how scared he was to lose the friendships, to lose the relationships. Is that fun? Is that cool? Who wants to do that? Who wants to risk their family disowning them? And it does happen, okay? Like of people, Christians who deconstruct and their families just like they treat them like they might not be like you're banished, like the Amish or something, but they might be like, well, you're just not the same to us anymore. You don't fit into these things. You're not going to be invited to that event or that event, because you participate in XYZ, whatever. But like, who wants to go through that? Who wants to risk their family relationships? Who wants to risk eternity? Like, if you are in a Christian worldview and you understand it and you deconstruct, and like for him, he equates it with leaving the faith and being, opposing to the faith. Well, like, you know what you're giving up, or at least the risk of it. That's a scary thing. It's a scary thing to deconstruct. It is not worth, getting 50 followers on Twitter. Like, I think that's where he's going with it, is like, oh, because, now you're a victim, because that's cool. Like, I understand there is a certain aspect of people when they share their stories, oftentimes online, they get support, and maybe support that they wouldn't get in their real life. And so I understand, like, from both, like, looking out and from within, I could see, it's something to share that story. Like, you want people to support you. And especially if you're not receiving that in your, like, real physical life, it might be like a really needed thing for you to go online and to get support from even strangers or people that you've interacted with a little bit online. So there is that appeal of being supported. But cool? No. Like, one, building any kind of platform, because that's where he's going to go with it. He's going to start talking about social media friends and stuff like that. I think what he's talking about are a few specific people from his own church who have deconstructed, and they've gotten quite a few followers. And I think that's who he probably has in mind, but I'm not a mind reader. I'm just guessing. But it is not worth, however, whatever success you might get online. And I think if you ask anyone who's gone through that process, even little things, guys, I've left fundamentalism. I've lost friends because of it. Now they would still be like, oh, no, we're still friends. But they did the separation thing. Why? Because I'm a Calvinist, and I have been since 2012. So I still don't know why it was such a big surprise for some people. But, walking outside of those circles, ministering outside of those circles, cut off relationships. That sucks. It hurts. It hurts to this day. Like, and I'm a Christian, like, and I'm still really conservative. So, like, you go to someone who might not be as conservative, still considers themselves to be a Christian, but not nearly as conservative. Maybe they don't go to church. Maybe they don't fit into, whatever category they did before. You talk to them about the relationships they've lost. It's not about being cool. This is such like an outsider looking in and just being like, well, they gained a lot of followers.
Now I can think back in years past that when somebody that I knew of, say as in my college days or younger years, was a Christian and claimed to be a Christian and they defected, it was kind of a quiet thing. They went away. There was shame and embarrassment.
Now, I can't speak to the like personal nature of that. Maybe he has firsthand knowledge of real people that did feel that and told him that they felt that. But to me, that sounds like they didn't talk to him about it, which makes sense. Like, because he's a pastor, right? Like, if you think about that, and he was influential the whole time, okay? There's never been a time when John MacArthur has been preaching that he was a nobody. All right, he was John MacArthur's son. Like, he was still a MacArthur. And then, as soon as he got out of college, he was a somebody. So, like, anyone who would have gone to college with him and then left the faith, do you think they're going to be, like, running over to him and talking to him about it and being like, oh, I left the faith, or I've been dealing with this or whatever? No. And anyone who has deconstructed, they know how hard those conversations are. And so sometimes they just don't have them. And I think that's reasonable. I think that they should have them because obviously I want them to come back to the faith. It's like not a good thing if they're just leaving the faith and they're just out there. Like, there should be connections. There should be tethers. But, to be like, oh, it was a shameful thing. That sounds to me just like he wasn't talked to about it, which makes sense.
It was sort of like being a homosexual, say in 1945.
That doesn't.
No one knew that. You wouldn't let any.
All right, this is old man, not just this is old man on the internet and forgets he's on the internet thing. I don't know why that's the first illustration that pops to your head, but it is for him. So I think it speaks to where like time frame he's.
But he knows that you wouldn't have a parade, that's for sure. So they didn't parade their apostasy, but. That's a new category of victim in which you can garner popularity and you can make a whole lot of new friends if you don't mind limiting your friends to the internet.
I have a lot of friends on the internet. Actually, I have a lot of friends in the deconstruction kind of weird Christian Twitter is what we used to call it. And, me and my wife were kind of on the ground floor of some of that stuff and I built a lot of friendships online. And they're real friendships. And here on the channel, we have real friendships. This is what this channel is really all about. It's about community. It's about interacting. We're going to do an afterlife in just a little bit where we could have a little bit more interaction. But I mean, he is right in a way. It kind of makes me wonder, I've had a few things that have popped out of him talking about watching certain things on his iPad and, like John MacArthur, he knows technology. He's not just like R.C. Sproul who, never used a computer. Like that's a real thing. He never used a computer. He's never been on the internet. But John MacArthur isn't that. He is internet savvy. It makes me wonder, whether he's watching these things, because I think he knows that there is a community. It is true. And like I said, it's kind of rational, though, if people aren't getting support in their daily lives, that they could go online and find community with other people who are going through the same things. Like, to me, that's not a bad thing. To me, I think that's a healthy thing, to be able to go and have relationships. Now, if those are your only relationships, that's one thing. And there's other conversations that could be had, but that's not like a knock. And just because like, oh, okay, now they have, I don't know, 600 people on Twitter that they don't know and are following them because they opened up about their story, or maybe they have a lot more than 600. Maybe just people resonated with that. Is that wrong? Is that wrong? Like, or why do you judge their motives for sharing, what has happened in their own life and what they've been experiencing? Now there are people who will go and they'll conflate their story. They'll be like, oh, I was spiritually abused. And you talk to them and they're like, they were told like a sin is sin. And it's like, well, I don't know if that counts as spiritual abuse, man. That's what the Bible says. Like there are stuff like that, and they're trying to get people to follow them. But this is an outsider looking in and being like, it's all this, and they're conflating things, and it's just no, it's not like that. There are real communities, and I think he has in mind weird Christian Twitter.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is going to continue, which obviously calls on the true church to be faithful and to be strong and preach the true gospel, so we don't produce half converts who will eventually deconstruct and fall away.
What he's focused on is teaching, which again, that just speaks to me. Like I just don't buy any of these celebrity pastors doing real ministry. Maybe they did back in the day, but I think they get to certain points where they just become speakers, and maybe like they pastor like their the people who work for them. So like maybe they do that, but it's just, this speaks to me of someone who hasn't had conversations with these people, of just being like, oh, they're all fitting into this category and they all just need more teaching. If you just had more teaching, if you taught the gospel more, then you would be able to, be fine. And we wouldn't produce these half converts, as he says. These people aren't deconstructing because, or at least the vast majority, aren't deconstructing or, maybe leaving their churches. I don't even know what he categorizes as deconstruction, because he puts a bunch of different things of deconstruction, evangelical, all these things mixed together. But who knows what he's actually meaning when he says deconstructionist. But when someone does that, like they're leaving a lot, and they're leaving because of hypocrisy, usually because they've seen something. They've seen Christians not acting like Christians, and saying one thing and doing another. And like that to me is the real problem. And that if we could figure out how to make sure that, when we have leaders, that they're held accountable, that when we elevate people in the church to positions of leadership, that we're making sure that they are actually living out their faith. If we do some of that stuff, it can curb some of it, but it's not going to stop it completely. And I think it's kind of naive just to be like, well, they just need more teaching. If they had more teaching, then, we wouldn't have deconstructionists. I think it's a little more than that. Like there's a real problem in evangelicalism right now, where it's a lot of grandstanding, it's a lot of virtue signaling, it's a lot of political endeavors being flooded into the church, and political ideology coming into the church too. And everything is polarized. And now, we're seeing some of the fruit of that of, oh, wait, like that guy said he was a Christian, he was a deacon, and he did what? Or that pastor, he did what to those people, and he's still in leadership. It's those kinds of things I think make deconstructionists start thinking about things and like looking for reasons. It's not like those reasons are valid. Like, it's not like they find the holes then, but they start looking at everything through their experience. And because of that, they see like all these problems. So for me, when I hear John MacArthur talk about deconstruction in this way, I just don't think he has firsthand experience with these people. Like, not these ones. Like maybe in the past and ministering to other people, but again, that's such a huge church. He talks about megachurch pastors. He's the biggest one. Like, he's literally the biggest one. Like, so I don't think that he's like dealing with these specific people. Maybe he's heard it through grapevines of, that pastor who's in charge of that area, that's in charge of that, deacon group that has like those several deacons who have talked to them. So it's like this, like, basically playing telephone, getting information, but it's not firsthand knowledge. And I think that kind of speaks to what he said here, that he's conflating a lot of different things and not having the conversations. And if you want to go online and talk about deconstruction, I think you have to have those conversations with real people, not just thinking about Rhett and Link, not just, like the celebrity Christian who's no longer celebrity Christian. Like, you got to have real conversations with real people and walk alongside them for a prolonged amount of time and see, what do they actually mean by some of this stuff? And are they actually still living out the faith? It just looks a little bit different than you. Like, that could be the case too. Let me know what you think down in the comments section. In a couple seconds, this thing is going to switch to a different stream, an afterlive, where I'll be taking a few of the comments from here and we could talk a little bit more about this and hang out together. So I'll be right back for that. See you there.